Gentlemen, you can't fight in here. This is the war room. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 64 of Movies Are Awesome, the show all about doing your own oil change. My name is Nathan Pottle, and thank you for joining me today. And today is another rainy day. It's been raining so often lately. All I want to do is mow my lawn. I want to go outside, I want to cut the grass, because it looks like a rainforest out there, but it rains so often, I don't have the time. It's like my grass isn't dry. I can't go out there and cut it. It's driving me crazy, and that's just something that's on my mind that I wanted to get out really quick. That's not what I'm talking about today, though. Obviously, I'm talking about Artemis Fowl. Now, this is a new movie release from Disney Studios. It was supposed to go into theaters in May. I think it was supposed to hit theaters, but obviously because of COVID and theaters being closed and all that stuff, it was now switched to a Disney Plus release. So my wife and I last week, we sat down and we watched Artemis Fowl, and now I'm going to talk about it. Usually I do a non-spoiler and spoiler section for my movie reviews. I'm not going to do that today just because there's nothing really spoilery to talk about. So I'm just going to talk about the general plot of this movie and what I didn't like about this movie, because there's really not a lot that I liked about this film. It's not that good. So there's a spoiler for the review there. This movie's not very good. So let's talk about why. For those of you who are not aware, Artemis Fowl is based off of a children's book. I have read the children's book when I was a kid. I also recently reread it in anticipation for the movie, and I liked it. I thought the book was fine. As a movie adaptation of what happens on the page and what happens on the screen, it is pretty bad. It's pretty different. Now, that's not a testament to why the movie is bad, though. A lot of movies have to make changes from page to screen. They're different mediums. You got to change things up. So that's not why I didn't like Artemis Fowl. I didn't like it because it's a poorly made film, but we're going to get into it. So basically the story here is that there's this boy genius named Artemis Fowl, and he is a criminal mastermind, or it's building towards him being a criminal mastermind, and his dad, who is also named Artemis, has been kidnapped and being held ransom, and in order for Artemis to get his dad back, he has to find this magical device that is very important to the fairy community that lives deep underground, and that's kind of our story. So he goes on a mission to get this ancient artifact from the fairy people, and in order to do that, he has to capture a fairy and hold her hostage, and then that's the basic plot of what's going on here. So you've got Artemis Fowl as our main character, and his butler, and a couple other people, and then there's the fairy girl who gets kidnapped. Her name is, I don't even know. I read the book and I watched the movie, and I do not remember her name. Holly Short, that's what it is. Her name is Holly, and there's other fairy characters. There's a centaur character. There's a dwarf character as well, who's played by Josh Gad. And then they just go on a little adventure. But there's not much traveling going on here. It mostly takes place in Fowl Manor, where Artemis lives, and that's where he's holding this fairy girl hostage, and a bunch of other things are happening, and nothing is really explained. But why don't I talk about the director first? This movie is directed by Kenneth Branagh, and I think that's part of the reason why I was so disappointed for this movie, because I really like Kenneth Branagh. I really enjoyed the movies that he's made. If you're not aware, he directed the first Thor film, he did the Cinderella remake, he did Murder on the Orient Express, which I really like, and the sequel, Death on the Nile, is supposed to come out later this year. It's probably going to get pushed to next year, though, because of COVID. Who knows? But I really like the work of Kenneth Branagh, and I was excited about this movie because he was attached to it. And, I guess everyone has a bad day at the office. Steven Spielberg has some movies that are not that good. Christopher Nolan has movies that are not that good. Tarantino has movies that are not that good. So everyone's allowed to have a bit of a fumble, and I think that Artemis Fowl is Kenneth Branagh's fumble, because this movie is just, there's just not much going for it. Let's start from the writing. This script is really, really bad. It's really poor. Like, the dialogue is awful. The actual plot of what happens in this movie makes no sense. And not only doesn't it make no sense, but the things that should make sense are not explained from within the movie. There are things that go on in this movie that I only understand because I've read the book. And my wife, who had not read the book, was just like sitting there completely confused, and like I had to pause the movie a few times saying like, okay, like this is happening because of this that's not being explained in the movie. And it just, like, the writing feels so lazy. It just feels like it was slapped together. I did look up the writer. I didn't write his name down. I can't remember what his name was, but his previous credits are 4 or 5 other things that he's written that I have never heard of. Artemis Fowl is the biggest thing that he's written, and it was just so poorly written. And especially when it comes to our main character of Artemis Fowl, he's supposed to be this boy genius who just like knows everything and is in complete control. But the way he's written like just a normal 12-year-old boy who has access to all of these resources. Like, not that he's really smart and has everything figured out, except we're supposed to believe that he's really smart and has everything figured out. Like, that's what everyone in the movie is telling us throughout the film, is that like he is the best and he's this evil genius kid, but there's nothing that he's actually doing that shows us that's who he is. And that's really frustrating as a aspiring writer myself, to see something like that where we're being told all of these things but not shown any actual evidence that this is how a character is and this is how he should be behaving. And this is just, it's not. And so what we're being told and what we're being shown are two completely different things, which then leads into the acting of this film. I felt the performances were also very poor, even from some of our veteran performers. Dame Judi Dench is in this movie, as well as Colin Farrell, and I think both of them were just kind of phoning it in. They're just in this movie for a paycheck or doing Kenneth Branagh a favor because they've both worked with him before. They're just there. Like, it just seems like a paycheck movie for them. They're not really invested in the characters that they're playing. They're just there to help sell the movie, I guess. And well, this movie's not really being sold because it's straight to streaming service. I don't know exactly how a movie going straight to streaming makes money. But if this did get a theatrical release, I feel like it would be considered a bomb, because not many people would go, and the people who did go are not going to walk out of there highly entertained from this film. Last I checked on Rotten Tomatoes, this movie has 9%. 9%. That's really, really bad. So even from just looking at a script standpoint, there were just like some changes that they could have made here or there that not only would have been a lot stronger and better choices, but also more accurate to the book. And being more accurate to the book would have made fans of the series happier when watching the film, and being more accurate to the book would have been the smart play, because it's a stronger story than what we were given. In the novel, Artemis Fowl's dad is not part of the story. He's not even in the book at all. That's not something that drives his character. But in the movie, that's all that drives his character, is that he's trying to get his dad back. In the novel, he's just trying to rebuild his family fortune by holding an elf hostage and like earning money. But at the same time, he's caring for his sick mother, who is a little mentally unstable, and he's having to deal with that as well. I find that way more interesting than his father's held hostage and he has to save his father. And I think it's probably because I've seen that before, time and time again. I want something that's a little bit different. So give me a boy genius who has a mentally ill mother who's trying to extort money out of a fairy community by holding one of their own hostage. And that sounds way more interesting to me. That's what the book is, and that's not what the movie is. And so as a result, we have a weaker story and a weaker film as a whole. Speaking again about the weakness of this script, and this is where like everything stems from. It's often said a lot of times that a movie is made 3 times. It's made once when you're writing it, once when you're filming it, and once again when you're editing it. And if you don't have a strong first time that you're making this, it doesn't matter how good of a director you are or how good anything else is, like everything is going to suffer if you have bad writing, and you're going to notice it, and it's just going to everything's going to go off the rails from there. So let's take a look more at the script. So there is a time device used by the fairy community in this movie that freezes time somehow, but also doesn't. And there is zero explanation as to how this works or how it's supposed to work. And then when the device like breaks down and like starts malfunctioning, it's not explained. We just have no idea what is the point of this device. Why are they using it? What is it supposed to do? We just have no idea. Also, to be fair, in the book, it's really not explained that well either, but it's just done horribly in the movie here. So that's one of the things that threw us off and confused us while we were watching this movie. Also, the sequence of events. Just kind of out of nowhere, there's an action scene in this movie where Artemis and the butler are like fighting a bunch of fairies who are flying around, and they all have guns, and this action scene just kind of comes out of nowhere, and all of a sudden you're in this action sequence that you don't understand why it's happening, and then all of a sudden the action sequence is over and the story just continues on, and there's just no explanation for it. We just have no idea what just happened or why it just happened. And then the repercussions of that fight don't even come up again in the film. It's like, have you ever seen The Room? Like with Tommy Wiseau, and it's just like, this thing happens, then this thing happens, then this thing happens, but none of those things are connected. That's kind of what watching this movie was like. When Tommy Wiseau's future mother-in-law comes in and says that she has breast cancer and like she's dying, and then it isn't mentioned or touched upon again for the entirety of the film. Or when one of the characters, Denny, in The Room has a drug problem and owes a drug dealer money, and then it's not mentioned or touched upon again in the entirety of the film. That's the vibe I'm getting from Artemis Fowl. It's very The Room in its sequence of events because they're barely tied together and barely in order, and I don't understand what they're trying to do with this movie. So that action scene makes absolutely no sense. When the humans and the fairies are interacting with each other, there's supposed to be some kind of like commands that you give to the fairies, or they can control your minds, but they barely spend any time explaining any of this stuff. This is a whole new world, and the world building was just so poor. Like, were they just expecting us to have read the book and understand these subtleties between humans and fairies? And if you give a fairy a command that they're not allowed to enter your house, that they have to obey it no matter what? Like, are we supposed to just understand that that's something that exists? Because that's another thing that my wife was like, wait, why did he say you're not allowed in my house? Why don't they just go in anyway? It's like some kind of magic thing that is explained in the book. It's not explained in here, and it's just frustrating. It's frustrating as a viewer to watch something that is so horribly put together and like so mangled that I don't even understand what is happening. And if I had not read the book, I would have zero understanding of this movie at all. Not for a moment would I get any of this stuff. I feel like I'm rambling and going on tangents all over the place here, so let's go back to my notes. Let's just get the main points that I have here, and I don't think this is going to be very long, because I don't want to just be ranting about this movie for forever. So I just have a few more points here that I want to touch on really quickly. This movie is narrated by Josh Gad's character, who is a dwarf who like does tunneling and stuff, and really the narration is throughout the entire movie, and it really has no bearing on the picture as a whole. I am fine with narration, like maybe at the beginning and maybe at the end of the movie, but narration all the way through, to me it feels super lazy. It's once again, it's telling the audience instead of showing the audience. It's a trope that's used in movies that I really don't like. Even in Kenneth Branagh's other movie, Cinderella, there's narration throughout that entire film as well. And that's the part about the movie that I dislike the most. I think that it did not need to be narrated the entire time. And I feel that way about Artemis Fowl, that take out all those narration scenes where you're actually like watching Josh Gad look at the camera and tell the story of what's happening. Take those scenes out and replace them with something that gets the point across, but also pushes the story forward. And it doesn't bring everything to a halt for Josh Gad to come in and explain things to us, especially because Josh Gad, when he's explaining things that don't matter or things that we can pick up from subtext. We need explanations on some of the world building things. We need explanations on some of the character motivations in the plot. I don't need to be narrated on how Artemis felt one day when his dad disappeared. I know that people are sad when their parents go missing. I don't need to be told that through narration, and I don't think anybody does. So that's one thing that bothered me about this movie as well. Also, there's not much to go off of as far as character development or even really character establishment. I mentioned earlier that Artemis Fowl is supposed to be this boy genius, and instead of really showing us that he's this boy genius who's cool, calm, and collected and always in control, he's really like the performance by the actor who's not in anything else. This is the first thing he's ever been in. So the performance that he gives is not, it doesn't reflect who the character is supposed to be. And so if we're told one thing about who this character is, and then the performance says something else about who the character is, what am I supposed to believe? I end up having to believe the performance because obviously the actor is making specific decisions about their character for specific reasons, and the director is working with the actor, so I have to go with that as my definition of who the character is. And then I have a character that I don't buy into. When my opinions are torn by what I'm being told and what I'm being shown, how can I get behind and support a character or really believe in what a character believes? I just can't. And this may be something that I've mentioned before on the podcast, and I think I have, but I don't believe in turn your brain off movies. I believe that they exist, and that there are movies out there that are just mindless action sequences, and that's all that they are. But I believe that you can have action films or movies that are highly entertaining, but also smart and intelligent about the way that they're doing it. I actually had a conversation with someone just last week. I can't remember what movie we were talking about, but he said like, oh, yeah, like I really like this movie. Like I just like sit back and I don't think about it, and it was really good if you watch it that way. No, my friend. If you have to not think about a sequence of events in order to enjoy something, then like what has this all been for? What is this all about? No. Movies are a art form, and they are a visual medium, and a lot of different people come together in order to make a movie here. So let's get smart people to write the scripts that we want. Let's get talented actors and actresses to perform these characters, and let's get talented directors to tell these stories in the strongest way possible, and let's have entertaining and smart movies at the same time. That's not what Artemis Fowl is. Now, it probably sounds like I'm really hating on this movie, and it's because I just really didn't like it. It's not good. I don't recommend it. I have not seen Wrinkle in Time, but I've seen a lot of people online compare Artemis Fowl and A Wrinkle in Time, that they're very similar, how like they're based off of famous kids' books, and then just kind of a mess of a film. I might sit down and watch A Wrinkle in Time at some point. I can't imagine it's as bad as Artemis Fowl, though. Like this movie is just not good. I'm looking at my notes here, though. That's all the points that I wanted to talk about. I have talked about in some sense, or ranted about in some sense. So I'm going to wrap things up here. We're going to close out the show. That's going to be it for me today. So my question for you, the listener, is, have you seen Artemis Fowl? Did you like this movie somehow? Are you in agreement with me on the points that I made about it? I would love to know. So reach out to me. You can feel free to do so. You can find me on Twitter at PottleNathan, and you can find the show on Instagram at Movies Are Awesome Podcast. If you haven't done so already, please feel free to subscribe to the show. You can do so on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and a whole bunch of other places. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. It really means a lot to me that you sit down and listen to me talk about movies, even if it's a bad movie like this one. So thank you a lot for that, and remember, if you have nothing else to do, go watch more movies.